A former Real Housewives producer just went public and torched Shannon Beador, accusing her of screaming and cussing at crew members right up until the cameras roll, then flipping instantly into what he called a tired old performative shtick. His exact words, one of the most miserable and narcissistic housewives across the entire brand. And this isn't the first time Shannon's treatment of crew has come up, but before we all pile on, there's some context floating around that almost nobody is reporting, including something this exact same producer said about Shannon that completely changes the tone. So let's break down what was actually said, who said it, and what the full picture looks like. Let's get into it. Here's how it started. On July 18th, comedian and Bravo superfan Heather McDonald posted a video parodying Shannon a bit she called the Shannon Beador acting class, where she demonstrated how to shriek, flail, and take dramatic pratfalls in Spanx. Her caption, calling all Real Housewives in need of a storyline, "Spaces at the Shannon Beador acting class is filling up fast." It's a reference to Shannon's famously theatrical on-camera reactions, the stumbling, the woes, the physical comedy that fans have been clipping for years. And honestly, it was funny. But then the comments section turned into something much bigger. A man named Patrick McDonald, a former Bravo producer who's worked on Real Housewives of Beverly Hills and Potomac, showed up and dropped a genuinely scathing comment. He wrote, "It's most wild to see her go from absolutely losing her shti, yelling, screaming, and cussing at the producers and crew right before the cameras turn on, and then she instantly clicks into this tired old performative shtick. One of the most miserable and narcissistic housewives across the entire brand." Heather McDonald replied simply, "You would know, haha," and Shannon's former Rock castmate Katie Janella also weighed in on the thread as it spread. Now this lands on top of a pattern. Back in 2024, comedian Joel Kim Booster, who was hosting the Peacock Housewives dating show Love Hotel, publicly accused Shannon of treating the crew like they are subhuman. And then in July 2025, an insider told the US Sun that Rock executives had actually stepped in. The source said Shannon had to be told to cool it more than once, to take her anger out on the problem, or even the cast, not the people just doing their jobs. They added, production had to step in and have a word with Shannon about the way she can speak to the filming crew sometimes. So there's now a former producer, a show host, and an anonymous production insider all telling versions of the same story. But here's where I have to be fair, because there are two significant pieces of context that almost nobody is including. First, Joel Kim Booster fully retracted and apologized. Weeks after his post, he wrote, "I let an on-set conflict cloud my judgment and access the darkest, ugliest part of myself and said things I don't stand by or even believe, and I am deeply sorry." He'd also called Shannon a pathetic drunk in that original post, which was genuinely a cruel personal attack, referencing her Dewey. So the person who started this narrative walked it all the way back and said he didn't believe what he'd written. That matters. And Shannon's response at the time was measured, she said, "All I can say is I didn't do what he said. I don't treat people subhuman," and admitted that everyone gets tired on set, but insisted it wasn't berating or screaming. Second, and this is the part I found genuinely surprising, Patrick McDonald, the same producer who just called Shannon miserable and narcissistic, said something very different about her on Bethany Frankel's podcast. He said, "Shannon Beador wasn't the most pleasant person to work with, but I still had immense empathy for her. I was like, wow, this woman is in a place where she probably should not be on TV right now, but she just has to." That's a completely different framing. That's not she's a tyrant. That's she's a woman who was struggling and being kept on camera anyway. Same producer, same person. Two very different takes depending on the venue. And it's worth noting, Patrick has his own complicated history with Bravo. He's claimed publicly that the network blacklisted him over his OnlyFans work, so he has a grievance with the machine, which doesn't make him wrong, but it's relevant context when weighing an Instagram comment against a podcast interview where he was more reflective. So where does that leave us? Honestly, somewhere in the middle. I think there's clearly something real here. You don't get a producer, a host, and a production insider independently describing the same behavior if there's nothing to it. And I'll say this plainly, however famous you are, screaming at crew members who are just doing their jobs is not okay. Everybody on a production has a moving part, but I also don't think the tyrant framing captures it. Patrick's own more thoughtful take that Shannon was a woman in a bad place who probably shouldn't have been filming reads truer to me than a viral Instagram comment. Shannon has been through a genuinely rough stretch publicly. The divorce, the Dewey, the fallout, none of that excuses mistreating crew, but it might explain it. And there's a difference between someone who's cruel by nature and someone who's melting down under pressure that a network keeps profiting from. What I'd actually love to see is Bravo asking the harder question if a cast member is repeatedly lashing out at crew. Is the answer to keep her on camera because the meltdowns rate well? Because that's a production problem, not just a Shannon problem. Do you think Shannon deserves the criticism, or is she being piled on? Pop off in the comments, smash the like button, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!